Hi everyone, welcome back to another video for ICM 2.0, the Python version. This video is a direct follow-up to the last one in which we were learning how to write custom functions that would allow us to draw designs we had created on screen. So rather than having to repeat a bunch of shape and color code, we could just call upon our function and learn to draw many. If you have not completed that video, I strongly recommend you go back and do it. We will be utilizing the finished starter code from that video here. And this whole project does require that you have some functions pre-written. So if that video is really not it, just make sure you have a document with some functions pre-written. You guys can see that from the last video, we had coded the definition of the happy face function together. And we went through and gave it two parameters, X position and Y position, where we could feed in arguments that would determine the position of our happy face when we called the function. And the ask was that you go through on your own and you define the function definition for angry face so that we can then use the angry face function in our code. If you did not get the angry face function done, I would advise you pause for just a moment, look through this code, take a peek if it matches what you did or not. This one can be a little bit tricky given that there are lines involved, and lines do not just have one point that we need to move, they have two. They have an XY and then another XY. So you would have needed to use those parameters in two different places in the line function so that the arguments get plugged in correctly. If you think that might be an error you have, you would know because when you draw another angry face somewhere else, the eyebrows are going to look crazy. So that would be your easy fix there. Once you have at least two functions, let's just think through functions for a minute. They're a way of avoiding kind of this endless repetition. And if we were to make a more complicated program, we might have many functions. This style of programming is called procedural programming, and it's a form of abstraction where instead of having all of these details in our code, we remove those details out, we hide them behind the name of a function, and then in our main program, we can just call the name of that function rather than having to mess around with these details every single time and risk getting something wrong. If we imagine a much more complicated program using procedural programming, there might be dozens of these procedures, functions, things taking up room in our code, and that can get so messy to look at, especially if you need to find and edit, modify, fix something in one of those functions, or just in your main code itself. This can get very hazy and difficult to read. So what a lot of programmers will do is to make separate files to house different pieces of their code and connect all of those files together so that everything is not just in one place, and it's a little bit easier to break down and look at what you have created. That's what we're going to learn how to do together today. So our very first step for this, we are going to click this plus button, which is going to allow us to create a new file. And we're going to name this file functions.py. The py is important because that's what's denoting to our computer that we are creating a Python file and to read the contents of that file as if it is in the Python language. Now we're going to go back and we're going to do a big leap of faith thing together. In our main.py code, we are going to take the definitions for both of our functions. So for happy face and angry face, we're going to copy them. We're going to paste them into functions.py, and then we're going to delete them out of main.py. Now, if we go back to functions.py, the first thing you're going to notice right away is that all of these things are highlighted in yellow, and it's telling me they're not defined. But I know, because we've been using it, that arc, ellipse, fill, stroke, stroke weight, those are all usable in the processing library. The reason why this isn't working is because we have not imported the processing library to this file. So I'm going to type at the top from processing import asterisk. And what that means is import everything from the processing library. Let me use any possible thing that exists. And I want that because I am utilizing processing in the act of making these functions. There may come a day in future courses or future projects where you're not using processing and this would not be required, but because we are, that's why we're putting it in there. Now, everything here looks good. It's not giving me any yellow errors, but if I go back to main.py and I were to, oops, I'm gonna get rid of this line, spoiler alert. If I were to run, you're gonna see that I'm getting errors. And if I scroll down to the bottom, it tells me that there's a name error, happy face is not defined, this is confusing because it's linked here. And the reason it's not there is because we have not imported the functions.py file. You guys saw a little bit of a spoiler alert from my dry run that I had it in there before. If we wanted to import the functions.py file, we would write from functions import star. And again, this import star, import asterisk, that is allowing us to import everything from that file. Now, if I run it, it runs perfectly. And we'll notice that my main code has shrunk substantially, and it is now much easier to read. I don't have to worry about looking at arcs or ellipses. I can just look at happy faces and angry faces, and I know and understand what those do because they have a descriptive name. Now, there's a few things that we need to talk through that I want to make sure we understand, but that we might not always be utilizing in this course. The first, you'll notice that in our code right now, we're actually importing processing twice because we import it in our functions file and then in our main.py file. It's happening double. When we import functions, when we import everything from functions, it's including that processing import. So technically, line 1, if we have a separate file, is not required. I am going to choose to leave that in because 1, we are not making especially like time-consuming or complex programs that are going to be a drain on our computer. And 2, while I think that having a separate functions file is a best practice, I recognize this might take a little bit for people or students to get in the habit of. And I don't want us to go around just deleting line 1 and then having errors if we don't have it in a separate location. If this becomes something that is really second nature, you are always developing in another file, and this is always happening, by all means, feel free to experiment. I am just leaving it there, and I just want to call out that I know that it is redundant. The second thing I want to call out is right now in both of these, we are importing everything from those libraries. With processing, I would like to have access to everything in the library. I don't want to have to hunt through the reference sheet for just things that I want to use. And same thing right now with my functions.py file. If in a different world, I had, let's say, a very large library, and I knew that I was only going to utilize a piece of it, rather than importing everything, I could import just one function. So if I wrote from functions import happy face, you'll notice when I play, it's going to give me an error that angry face is not defined anymore because I'm not importing everything. I am just importing the happy face. If I comment my angry faces out, you'll see that the happy face runs fine because that is the thing that's getting pulled out of my functions.py file. Now, there's also one more way that I could import things. I'm going to go ahead and comment my angry face back in, and I'm actually going to get rid of this line for a minute. Right now, when we say from functions import whatever, it's pulling things in and it's treating those functions as if it is native to our Python libraries, if it is not coming from a different source. If you were to make a very complex product where maybe you had, let's say, a dozen files that are holding different functions, and maybe later when you learn about objects, it might have classes and objects and all of these things, it might make sense for you to know where those are coming from. And in that case, instead of using the from declaration, you might write import functions. When you write import functions, it is going to make it so that when you call a function, when you call something from that file, you have to put the name of the file in front of it. So I'm going to put functions.happyface, functions.happyface, functions.happyface. And I'm going to comment my angry faces out again, just because I don't want to type this again. Now, when I hit play, you'll see that they all show up. We can also do a little something tricky, and this is entirely bonus and extra, where I can choose to give different names to those files. So I can import functions as, I don't know, I'm going to call it F. If I don't want to type all of functions, I'm going to get the error again, because now instead of functions.happyface, I need to put f.happyface. And this is essentially just saying import it, but I'm going to call it something else. I'm going to call it something that's a little bit easier. This is always an option. You are welcome to play with it. You are also welcome to do a little bit of deep diving into the other options that exist in Python, because there are many. But please just know that for the purpose of this course, we are probably just going to be doing from functions import star almost all of the time, unless you are told differently. Again, please play, please experiment with trying to make things that are, even more efficient, because it's not importing everything as you see fit. It's just not going to be our norm. This making of a separate file is a best practice that I know may take a little bit of getting used to, but I would encourage you, whenever you notice that your code is getting long and unwieldy, think about the things that you can, first of all, extract into a function, and then the functions that you can move away to a secondary location once you understand that they are working and behaving the way that you want, so that you don't risk accidentally messing with them, typing over them, deleting something that you wanted, and your code becomes overall easier to read. I hope that this helps you out. There is actually one more thing. I don't know why I'm getting rid of this that I wanted to make sure we all saw. Let me go back to sharing my screen. The final piece is there may be a world where you are asked to share your functions with other people. When you're sharing your functions, if they just get something that looks like this, they might be able to figure out what it means. But there's a very real world where they might be confused about what's the purpose of happy face? What is XPOS and YPOS? Why is that there? And for this, we recommend always including documentation in your function. This documentation can be helpful not just to other people, but also to you. If you ever go back to this code, maybe weeks, months, a semester, even years later, and you want to know what you were up to, the documentation can help you out. When we document our functions in Python, we like to use a syntax instead of our normal hashtag comments. We do 3 quotation marks to begin and end our documentation. And if we were to code in a different IDE, this often will generate helper text, where when people start writing, it will show you what is happening there. So what I like to do when I'm writing out this definition is I like to write out what it looks like. So it's happy face, X position, Y position. I leave a note that it draws a happy face and takes in an X and Y position. And you could even put like your name so that people know that you are the author. I could put like by my name if I saw fit. This is entirely up to you. You guys can edit what is in here, and you will see in the actual lesson and in the class itself that we do have some specific benchmarks we want to meet for our class purposes of what goes into documentation. But just know that the documentation is always going to have these 3 quotation marks starting and ending it, and it is there just to help make sense of your code. I hope that you guys will put this to good use, and I look forward to seeing you in future lessons. Bye.